All right. First rule of this channel: we do not talk about this channel. Second rule of this channel: this is not legal advice. So, welcome to After Waivers Week 11, the trade deadline edition. Sometimes I don't want to overthink things. I just want to take the path of least resistance. This show may take a little longer than usual. I want to be talking a lot about values and trades instead of separating the values video into a separate one. I think it just goes really well with this one. Remembering that the same process that will win me my league is the same process that will probably lose it for me when it comes to taking the risk and upgrading a player. I could lose the player that was potentially going to win me my league trying to catch the guy that will also lose me my league. So anyway, week 11 buys are the Falcons, the Colts, the Pats, and the Saints. Not a particularly difficult one to get through. Week 12, there are no buys to kind of pretend or predict ahead of time what I'm going to do and what my opponents are going to do. My chasing the dragon video yesterday on the reactive waiver ads have guys like if Josh Dobbs, Trey McBride, Devin Singletary, Noah Brown are available in your leagues, they are likely priority ads. We'll talk a little bit more about them later. And then Keaton Mitchell, probably going to have a difficult road to win you a league. Same thing with Demario Douglas, but they are okay ads if they're still available. And then Zach Charbonnet, if he's still available. Other guys that I talked about yesterday, Quentin Johnston, the wide receiver for the Chargers, and then Rico Dowdle. And then the bell of the ball right now, it looks like from a reactive waiver wire pickup is the Vikings running back Ty Chandler. So if you're just into that type of stuff and don't need all the number crunching and theory, go check out that other video or just see you later. So anyway, first of all, we're talking about the Niners and the beatdown that they had of the Jaguars. Brock Purdy, like I talked about before, I think he's good enough to win you your league. He's going to have a safe enough floor with just enough ceiling to get you there. He was 19 to 26, 296, 3 tugs on 79% of snaps in the blowout. And I think we can put the Purdy benching to nonsense because they pulled him late in the game and they brought in Sam Donald to finish the game off a little bit more. They were a little bit more worried that Brock Purdy was going to get hurt than CMC. I did see someone put in the comments that the Niners were trying to extend CMC's touchdown record. That's why he was in so late in the game. I was a little bit annoyed. And from a coaching standpoint, I hate that stuff, but I also understand why you kind of have to do it for your players because that's the charisma and the camaraderie that you want to have, the good feelings that you need to have for a team. So anyway, CMC was 76% snaps, 16 for 95, and then another 10 for 6 for 47 in the passing game. And then if you're still into that stuff, like Elijah Mitchell is the cuff, obviously in this game with the blowout, he did 27% of snaps, 8 for 23. Again, not going to be very efficient right now, and you're probably only going to be getting about like 60 to 70% of CMC, even if all the opportunities and the touches and the efficiency go the same way. Jordan Mason was only on 5% of snaps, and he had no touches. Let's see. Debo was at 68% snaps in this one, 4 for 4 for 30, and then another 3 for 29 and a touchdown on the ground. And then Ayuk was 3 for 3 for 55 and a touchdown. These are both sells, in my opinion, at the trade deadline. I'm going to talk about guys like Gabe Davis later on. Brandon Ayuk is basically Gabe Davis. And I'll get into Gabe Davis when we get to the Bills here in a second, but the amount of volatility that you're going to have in an Ayuk and a Debo going down the line, this has nothing to do with their talent. It's just they're going to be weeks where not all of them get home. They all got home this week primarily because they scored touchdowns, but that's not always going to occur, and there's only going to be so many targets that you're going to be able to get out of these guys or opportunities on top of that. So Debo got it done on the ground. That costs CMC his touchdown. That's what they were chasing late. And then Ayuk gets the receiving touchdown. That means that can't go to Debo, can't go to CMC, can't go to Kittle. The amount of opportunity that CMC is getting in this offense, he can get home with just that passing floor as a running back. Debo and Ayuk, they need high efficiency plays with against their low opportunity that they're going to have. Anyway, George Kittle has that 73% snaps, 4 for 3 for 116 and a touchdown. The difference between Kittle and Ayuk and Debo is that Kittle can, at any given week, allow you to go toe-to-toe with like a Travis Kelce or a Mark Andrews or a TJ Hawkinson. That's what his value really comes from. And then the rest of the time, he's just your basic tight end because there's only so many opportunities to go around. So yeah, if I could buy Kittle and because I'm that bad at a tight end position, it at least allows me to know when I go into the finals against a team that probably is going to have one of these premium tight ends that I could potentially cancel that guy's week out. And any other tight end I roll out there is not going to give me that chance. And then like I have written down, don't be cute against Tampa, just roll them out against Tampa Bay. And they're probably after the showing against the Jaguars. Again, the Jaguars are supposed to be like, a not bad to not good offense. They're just a weekly roll, and I wouldn't be overthinking them too much unless I have the ability to stream a very good matchup along with them. Moving on to the Bears, I read yesterday, Justin Fields will be evaluated this week in practice before they make a decision. So Tyson Bagent could be rolled out. He was 20 of 33 for 162, another 6 for 12 on the ground. I watched JT O'Sullivan's quarterback school on him. I'm going to always pull for the underdog in Tyson Bagent. From a fantasy perspective, that's not good enough. He's the underdog, the undrafted D2 kid. But the tape was not pretty. There's some stuff to like about him long term. Maybe he could develop into like a Gardner Minshew, that type of like too good to be a backup, not good enough to be a starter type of guy. But some of the throws that he missed, and just again, there's some coaching issues going on with him. Did make some good throws, but again, primarily if I'm going to be rolling out a Tyson Bagent right now, it's because of the theoretical rushing floor. And there are probably better guys that I can go out there and use than a guy who is going to be capped from a passing perspective. And then if he doesn't get there on the ground, then I'm kind of out of luck that week. Deonta Foreman was at 53% snaps, 21 to 80 with a touchdown, another 2 for 12. Roschon was at 42% snaps, 5 for 12, or excuse me, 5 for 18, 6 for 4 for 14. And then Darrington Evans was at 8% snaps, but he still got the opportunities that take away from the other backs. 2 for 5, and then 2 more targets. Khalil Herbert is expected to be active this week, so that would shoot him up from my perspective on the waiver wire. But you're going to have to temper your expectations because we don't know how it's going to shake out with him, Foreman, Roschon, and then Evans still potentially getting opportunities. They do have Travis Homer, who's going to be more of the special teams guy. So monitoring the actives, inactives, even if you get a Khalil Herbert, is going to give you a better understanding of what your expectations should be with Khalil Herbert down the line. And that's potentially even with the upgrade of Justin Fields coming back. Like I said, I have written down monitor inactive. And then the other problem that we're going to have with the Bears coming down the line is guessing game flow. And usage, the backfield's going to be a mess. So the other problem with Justin Fields coming back is some weeks the Bears offense might be really good, and other weeks the Bears offense might be really bad with Justin Fields. And with Tyson Bagent, at least we know it's not going to be good. So understanding how the toys are going to shake out once Fields comes back for the playoff push. A guy like DJ Moore, he was at 93% snaps, 9 for 5 for 58. And again, going back to the JT O'Sullivan tape, there were a lot of design plays to DJ Moore that Tyson Bagent either doesn't have the confidence to try and make or doesn't have the ability to make. So DJ Moore would be a sneaky buy to me going into the playoff push for that flex wide receiver 2 type role, that boom bust wide receiver 2 type role. They were still scheming him up with Bagent, and I can only imagine that Fields is going to be the upgrade. And then with the slight expectation that I could maybe get one of those boom weeks during the money weeks. And I would really be interested in doing that. Cole Kmet was at 92% snap, 7 for 5 for 45. And the defense, I wouldn't think about getting cute with them until maybe the championship game against Atlanta. And this would probably be in deeper leagues. All right, the Bengals. Joe Burrow was at 27 40, 347, 2 tugs, 2 picks, and then another 5 for 20 on the ground. So again, I'm going to guess that he's either healthy or pretty close to it, and then he fumbled and didn't lose it. So Joe Burrow should remain in that sub-elite category. The good news about Joe Burrow is Joe Mixon is not good enough as a running back to really take over games in the backfield. So Joe Mixon is going to be in play as that like volume-based RB2 attached to a very good offense. So there shouldn't be a game where he eats into Joe Burrow. What's going to be more likely is Joe Burrow is going to eat into Joe Mixon. If you're cuffing Joe Mixon, it's still Travion Williams. He was at 22% snaps, only one target, one reception for 2 yards. But again, gearing up for the playoffs, that this would be a guy that I would be looking to cuff sooner rather than later if I'm the Mixon owner. And if I'm the Mixon owner, I probably wouldn't be selling him because of the volume. There aren't a lot of good running backs out there. I can look him up. Actually, I did bring this up today on purpose. So the running backs are so bad right now. You can see guys like Raheem Mostert and Devin Achane are at the top when it comes to points per game. Joe Mixon, and again, me being really prepared. Joe Mixon is at 13.3 points a game, which is going to traditionally would put him in that mid to low level RB2 range. But this has been such a bad year for running backs. I don't know how much you're going to be able to replace him. And I don't know how much there is a road for him to win you a league if you were to go out and buy him. He's just going to be that middle floor guy. The ability to give you a sub 40-degree day is about the same as a spike week because of how attached to the offense he is. Jamar Chase was at 84% snaps, 6 for 5 or 124. A tug, let's see. T. Higgins is out and unlikely to play this Thursday, if you're wondering. Tyler Boyd, I was wrong on this. He was at 92% snaps, 12 for 8 for 117, 102 air yards. And that's against Trenton Irwin, the guy that I thought would have been the play this week. He was at 81% snaps, 4 for 2 for 54 and a tug. He did have 70 air yards. So Trenton Irwin is going to have the higher ceiling with T. Higgins out. Tyler Boyd is going to be the safer floor guy. And this week, Tyler Boyd just got that volume against Jamar Chase. And I tried to look this up on Fantasy Pros. Fantasy Pros, I think, said that Jamar Chase was at 34 air yards. I don't believe that because I did watch the touchdown that Jamar Chase had, and it traveled over like 34 yards. So Tyler Boyd, if he's like essentially the extension of the rushing game for the Bengals, he would have that value. And then Trenton Irwin is the wide receiver 3 that you're trying to catch lightning in a bottle. Andre Iovas, the third guy, the 6th rounder out of Princeton, he did see a spike in his, or slight upgrade in his usage at 28% snaps, only 1 target. Trying to guess the Bengals tight ends. So Irv Smith was at 33%, 1 for 1 for 6. He's the receiving tight end. And then Drew Samples at 36%, 3 for 2 for 12. He's the blocker. Tanner Hudson was at 31% snaps, 7 for 6 for 33 yards. All 5 of his catches came on the opening drive of the game. They're not efficient. So I'm not really interested in Tanner Hudson because of how he slots in. He's still the tight end 3 in this, but if his snap share goes up and potentially he could work his way into that safer floor tight end attached to Joe Burrow, that would be something that would have a little interest. But right now, just because of the low snap share, I think it's chasing windmills at this point. The defense is going to be a strong weekly play because they're attached to Joe Burrow, which means they're going to have more opportunities just to pin their ears back and go after him. But I would not be rolling them out this week against the Ravens. All right. Bills on Monday Night Football. The Bills did fire their OC Ken Dorsey today because Josh Allen is a turnover machine and they can't figure out how to get this offense working correctly. I think part of this is frustration on the Bills and the fact that Josh Allen is a turnover machine. I think the other part of it is there are some problems with the Bills offense. I'll get into them in a second. So Josh Allen, 15-26, 177, 1 tug, 2 picks, a fumble loss, and another 4 for 13 and a touchdown on the ground. Again, elite quarterbacks doing elite quarterback things, getting it done with that touchdown on the ground. That's more predictive than not. James Cook was at 46% snaps, 12 for 109, 2 for 2 for 11, 2 fumbles, 1 loss, 1 bounced back up into his hands, and then he took it for like 29 yards. Latavius Murray was at 52% snaps, 9 for 68, a touchdown, another 3 for 2 for 1. Probably not a good idea to go chasing any of this backfield because of how unpredictable they're going to be. Leonard Fournette, Uncle Neddy, there was no news. He wasn't activated. I haven't heard anything about anything going forward. The backfield did, for the most part, outside of those fumbles, shake out the way that I think the Bills would like it to. I think one of the biggest issues with Ken Dorsey is they can't figure out how to get the running game to be consistent to take the pressure off of Josh Allen doing Josh Allen things. So Stephon Diggs was at 98% snaps, 5 for 3 for 34. And I did talk about Gabe Davis. He was at 98% snaps, 6 for 2 for 56, a 2-point conversion. And like I said, he basically Brandon Ayuk. So I will pull him up on good old Sleeper. When we look at Gabe Davis and what he's doing, like these are the down weeks for Brandon Ayuk. The 4.2 that Gabe Davis had week 1, but then he had 18, then he's at 9, 13, 19, 1, 1, 19, 0, 8.6. And when I pull up Brandon Ayuk, like probably the biggest difference between Brandon Ayuk and as I can't type again. The biggest difference between Brandon Ayuk and Gabe Davis is going to be that Brandon Ayuk probably has a slightly higher floor than Gabe Davis does, but Gabe Davis has a slightly higher ceiling. So when we look at Brandon Ayuk, week 1 he does 28 points, and then he's at 5, then 17, then 7, then 9, then 8, then 13, then 13. So again, he probably has that slightly better ceiling, or slightly higher floor, because he's going to be the de facto number 1 in the offense on a week to week basis. So he's not going to get shut out the way that Gabe Davis does. But again, Gabe Davis can just go out there and have these monster games just because of how he's used. And that's not going to happen with Brandon Ayuk. So from a value standpoint, trading Brandon Ayuk or trading for Brandon Ayuk is basically like trading for Gabe Davis in your lineup. And trading for Gabe Davis is going to be basically like trading for Brandon Ayuk, if that makes sense. Now, again, Brandon Ayuk may have a little bit more consistency, but from a fantasy standpoint, most games are not close games. They are blowouts on one side or the other. So losing 5 points that Brandon Ayuk could give you in a bad week is essentially the same thing as losing that 0 week that Gabe Davis gives you. And then trying to predict that spike week, Gabe Davis versus Brandon Ayuk, is probably going to be futile. So they're both going to give you about the same upside on a week-to-week basis. And one guy in Gabe Davis may be on your waiver wire, and Brandon Ayuk is not. And again, from pulling up the scoring leaders this year on a week-to-week basis, we can see that Brandon Ayuk is only at about 15 points a game, and Gabe Davis is, again, me being prepared, at 12 points a game. So you're losing about 4 points a game between the two of those guys. But that doesn't matter, because what we're actually looking at is the ability to pull back up. The difference between those 40-degree days, the 3 ranges of outcome. Did they win me a week? Did they push, or did they lose me the week? And they're going to be relatively the same. But my ability to go out and get a Brandon Ayuk when someone's running them as their like wide receiver 2 versus Gabe Davis, that someone is probably that may be on someone's bench or on the waiver wire, is very similar. That's how I would tend to look at these two guys. So if I'm trading away a Brandon Ayuk, I'm trading away a boom bust wide receiver 2. If I'm buying a Gabe Davis, I'm buying a boom bust wide receiver 3. And from a overall ability for a guy to win me or lose me a week, they're so similar to each other that they may not be any difference, because when their stat lines convert to points, it doesn't matter. I don't care how the sausage is made sometimes. Amari Cooper getting a touchdown that bounces off a guy's helmet doesn't make any difference to me. And the ability for me to upgrade at a certain position, it's how much I'm going to be able to get certain guys. So going back to the running back position, there's just certain running backs that guys, you're not going to be able to go get a Christian McCaffrey. So there's no point on talking about trying to buy a Christian McCaffrey. I probably might be able to buy a Saquon Barkley, but even the owner of a Saquon Barkley, might value him so much higher because of just the floor that he's going to have on a week-to-week basis. They're not going to give that guy up, because once you get past a certain point in the running back wasteland, like a Brian Robinson has a lot of value, because even though he has that lower floor on a week-to-week basis, he's shown at this point that he has this massive ceiling. So there's just not better guys to go out there and get. And that's part of what I wanted to talk about today when it comes to the overall value of guys. Sorry for detail or derailing everything a little bit. But that's what my thought process is on going out and getting these guys. So a Khalil Shakur, he was at 76% snaps, 2 for 1 for 24. And again, that's the problem with not just wide receiver 3s from a fantasy perspective. It's the problem of wide receiver 3s on all these teams in real football. Like, you're just not going to be able to predict when their outcomes are going to be. And then at that point, you might as well be chasing higher and higher ceilings, because the floor just doesn't matter. The chances of you getting into a knife fight where that 5 points is going to make a difference isn't going to matter. Like I lost my high stakes league. I lost this week, And the ability for me to predict enough, because I had Gabe Davis on my bench, I still would have had to make another move if I had predicted Gabe Davis this week. And Gabe Davis only put up like 8 points in half PPR. So like when you're getting to that point where it's just like, oh, if I would have played this guy over that guy, you weren't going to win that week anyway, most of the time from a fantasy perspective. So moving on, Dalton Kincaid was at 76% snaps, 6 for 5 for 51 and a touchdown. He's going to remain in that mid to high end tight end range until Dawson Knox gets back. And again, as an owner of Dalton Kincaid, I would be preparing for a massive change in usage when Dawson Knox comes back. And I think Dawson Knox is available to come back week 13. That's their buy for the Bills. And then after that, I would imagine he's going to be back for week 14 in some capacity. Their defense again has been disappointing. They have the Jets this week. I think as bad as Zach Wilson and the Jets offense have been, I think you could roll them out with some degree of confidence. But again, then I would not be thinking about rolling them out again until they play the Patriots in the chip. Okay, so their opponents on Monday night were the Broncos. And again, when we're comparing guys like apples to apples, Russell Wilson was at 24 for 29, 193, 2 tugs, really pretty. I don't know if it was luck or just talent getting to Cortland Sutton in the corner of the end zone on a scramble. Another 9 for 30. And again, from a fantasy perspective, Russell Wilson is basically Trevor Lawrence at this point, because Russell Wilson is giving you more or less a weekly floor and with a limited ceiling. And Trevor Lawrence is going to give you the same ability to lose your week. He's never going to have a ceiling, and there's a little bit of nimbly-bimbly with Russell Wilson. So if I'm comparing these two guys, especially this week with Trevor Lawrence, if Trevor Lawrence can't go out and be startable against San Francisco, because that's a bad matchup, I can't trust Trevor Lawrence to be anything more than a streamer. And at this point, I might as well just roll Russell Wilson out on a week-to-week basis. So that's how I would see these guys going into the bye weeks. Am I going to be just streaming from a quarterback perspective? Okay, well, if I'm going to do that, then like if someone wants Trevor Lawrence, if there's still any value left in Trevor Lawrence, then there probably shouldn't be. But that's how I should be valuing Trevor Lawrence in my head from this point on. Like he's a streamer, probably has a very low floor, because, again, going out doing 4 points against the 49ers, and he's going to have a cap ceiling. And that's how he should be viewed going forward. And again, a guy like Russell Wilson is going to have actually a slightly higher floor, even though he's going to have about the same ceiling. Moving on to Javonte Williams. Javonte was at 52% snaps, 21 to 79, 4 for 4 for 31 and a touchdown. Whether or not you can buy or sell Javonte, again, there's so few running backs that are out there in fantasy football land. I don't know how much his value would be to move him, and I don't know how much his value would be for you to go out and get him. But what bothers me is the 52% snaps on top of everything else. So again, we're looking at a guy that may have to be in a neutral game script to have value. The Broncos may be improving as a team. So again, the risk behind this, should I go out and trade Javonte, or should I go out there and trade for Javonte? Like, I don't know, because again, you're looking at about the same range of outcomes either way, that the Broncos are bad. They're not in neutral strips. He can't put this opportunity up. He can't convert for touchdowns, is about the same, that the Broncos have turned the corner and they are going to be this like very sluggish team that remains competitive for the rest of the year. So it would depend more on if I can upgrade Javonte to a better week-to-week play, or if I'm selling him for more than what his value would be as a mid to low end RB2. Jaleel McLaughlin was at 15% snaps, 6 for 2. And I screwed up on my notes, but anyway, he's probably no longer fantasy relevant. I'm not going to be talking about him too much. Again, when I say he's not fantasy relevant, I don't even know if he's rosterable at this point. Same thing with Samaje Perine, 33% snaps, 1 for 8, and then another 3 for 3 for 35. If I'm, there's no point to cuff Javonte, because I think if he goes down, then McLaughlin and Perine will basically split the reps. And there's not a very good way to know what value reps are going to go what direction. Cortland Sutton, in my mind, would be a buy at this point. 87% snaps, 11 for 8 for 53, and a tug. He did fumble. It wasn't lost. But again, this is the type of low end wide receiver 2 that may be valued as a wide receiver 3. I don't care how the sausage is made. He keeps scoring touchdowns, 11 targets, even if the offense is not particularly good. This is maybe a guy that I can go out and buy from an owner that may be undervaluing him from a week to week basis. From a fantasy perspective, all I care about is the stat line. And how it's done all the time, I can't predict, but I can look at the stat line and see that the stat line has been predictable and he's been able to get me home. So as a low end wide receiver 2 with a little bit of consistency going forward, I could probably get a Cortland Sutton as opposed to going out and trying to get a Brandon Ayuk. Jerry Jeudy, 65% snaps, 3 for 3 for 35. Again, he's no longer fantasy relevant. And if you're chasing Marvin Mims, even from a dynasty perspective, I think it's time to move on. 69% snaps, 1 target. Again, all that coach speak doesn't matter if it doesn't translate. And if Sean Payton just isn't into Marvin Mims, he's not going to be a thing this year. It starts to worry me about if he's going to be a thing next year when a guy like Little Jordan Humphrey was at 19% snaps, but he did get 1 target for 14 yards. The defense, and again, if the Broncos have kind of turned a corner and they are a little bit more fantasy relevant because they're going to be competitive, the defense has some interest against Minnesota because Josh Dobbs is kind of a turnover machine. Same thing with Cleveland. Deshaun Watson is a little bit of a turnover machine. They do play the Patriots week 16. So again, that's another thing to be looking at as a potential good role. And then they have the Chargers in the chip. And again, the Chargers as an offense have been very inconsistent. And if the Broncos can go out there and they can hang with the Bills and put up a positive fantasy outcome on defense, they would be a team that you potentially could even think about rolling out against the Chargers late in the season. The Browns, Deshaun Watson all over the place, very inconsistent. 20 of 34, 213, 1 tug, 1 pick. 8 for 37 on the ground, a fumble not lost. They did an MRI on his ankle on Monday, but he did end up playing the rest of the game. He's probably going to stay in that low end starter range because he can give you that 8 for 37 on the ground on a week to week basis. That's going to stay there. But again, he's never going to have a high enough passing volume to do anything else. And I just can't see that he's going to have this consistent rushing floor or rushing ceiling, from a rushing touchdown standpoint and having a ridiculous week where he's up to 60, 70 yards rushing on top of that. So I think if you're going to be streaming around him, that's probably not a bad thing, but to try and win a championship, I would rather be rolling out the consistency of a Brock Purdy with his ceiling against Deshaun Watson's inconsistency in kind of unknown to cap ceiling that Deshaun Watson has. Jerome Ford was at 64% snaps, 17 for 107, a 1 for 1 for 2, and he's going to be very capped because of Hunt's usage. Hunt was at 36% snaps, 10 for 32 and a tuck. So I could see that some of the higher value touches, i.e. the red zone and maybe those very valuable third down conversion in the passing game are going to go to Kareem Hunt. Jerome Ford is going to be more of a boom bust guy. He is getting most of the volume. I can see him. Well, he has been used designed in the passing game, but again, it's going to be the issue of consistency. So Jerome Ford would be a guy to again, the same process that'll win me a league, lose me a league. Jerome Ford is a guy to sneakily buy or to sell, either because he does have a certain amount of volatility as my starting running back that I want to have someone else be someone else's problem. But again, he may have enough of a weekly floor with a cap ceiling that I would go out and want to buy, knowing that he's going to get 15 to 20 opportunities a game with an okay offense or okay to not bad offense. The bigger news out of all this when it comes to these two running backs is Pierre Strong was at 0% snaps. So even if you were to go chase one of these running backs, you could go out and look at a Kareem Hunt and know that you have the red zone guy for this offense. So he could keep you in that relatively safe floor range, that touchdown dependent RB2 range that those guys don't grow on trees, especially going into the playoffs. So both these guys are potential buys and sells depending on what you need to build your lineup for going into the playoffs. Amari Cooper's at 92% snaps, 8 for 6 for 98. And again, I don't think he should be bought or sold because again, he is going to have a cap ceiling. He's going to be a little inconsistent because of the quarterback play. And again, I don't know who would be buying or selling Amari Cooper at this point, other than to upgrade. If you're selling him as part of a deal to upgrade, I could definitely understand that. Elijah Moore, again, I don't think he's a thing. Just one touchdown finally this week, 83% snaps, 7 for 5 for 44 and a touchdown. Going to be very non-predictive. Cedric Tillman, the rookie third rounder, was at 85% snaps, 3 targets. Probably more of a dynasty follow than anything else, but I could definitely see that he will have a spike week. It's just going to be non-predictive. David Njoku, in that low end to mid range, tight end one, just set and forget, don't overthink it. He would be a buy if you're really needy at tight end and someone's willing to give him up. He was at 87% snaps, 9 for 6 for 58. There is design work for him, and there's design work for him in the red zone, which makes him very interesting to kind of fill out a roster or a lineup going forward into the playoffs. Their schedule is pretty good that I have written down. I can pull it up if I can figure out how to do certain things. And this would be one of the times with the Browns going forward. They got Pittsburgh at Denver. Again, Denver's not going to be good. They may not be bad anymore. The Rams may not be bad, but again, I think there's enough there with the quarterback play to potentially get sacks and turnovers when they play that game. Jacksonville, again, I think Jacksonville's overrated. This would be a good week to continue to roll the Browns out. Chicago, Justin Fields should be back at this point, but again, he's kind of a turnover machine and a sack machine. Houston, maybe I wouldn't be rolling him out, but I would be rolling him out for the Jets game and the chip. So the reason why I bring up the Browns defense is this would be one of those sneakier type moves that I would be making to trade for the Browns defense, knowing that like there's only 1 week that I have to worry about streaming around them, and that's in the semifinal game. Otherwise, I'm just rolling them out every week and getting this top tier play. If they did what they did against the Ravens offense, 15 points, like I can expect that they'll be hovering around that range on a week-to-week basis. And a lot of times in a lot of leagues, and I've tried to do this before when I've been trying to buy and sell defenses, team players or other guys don't really know how to evaluate defenses. So I can kind of sometimes get better value on return on investment that like sometimes they'll take a wide receiver 3, i.e. a Gabe Davis, because they're needy at wide receiver, and they'll just give me a defense because defenses can be easily replaced by streaming. So that would be something I would be interested in doing. And again, from a roster construction standpoint, going into the playoffs, me carrying 2 defenses is probably a better play. There's more strategy to that than a wide receiver 3 that I will never use outside of a multitude of injuries. Moving on to the Buccaneers. So Baker May was at 18 to 29, 278, 2 tugs, 1 pick, another 3 for 12 on the ground. Going to remain in that high end streamer, low end, starting quarterback range. I don't know how predictive he's going to be. I'm trying to work on the owner of Baker May in my league to send him Josh Dobbs if he thinks that Josh Dobbs is a good enough upgrade. And again, this is the good process behind this. He may be right that Josh Dobbs may not be enough of an upgrade to Baker May. So even though Josh Dobbs may have a higher overall week-to-week ceiling because of that rushing floor, Baker May's consistency may be more valuable to him than Josh Dobbs' potential ceiling and that bottomless floor that the turnover machine Josh Dobbs has. So Baker May this week has just been a very consistent player that you can plan the rest of your lineup around, knowing that he's going to give you about that 15 points with a little bit, very little, floor and ceiling to go along with that. So Rachaad White, 71% snaps, 20 for 51, 3 for 2 for 47, and a touchdown. Again, I was expecting to have a little bit more of him being used in the passing game. That didn't come through this week, but I'm not concerned about it. Chase Edmonds was at 28% snaps. This is probably mostly to keep Rachaad White healthy. Only 4 for 9, not very efficient in the rushing game. Another 1 for 1 for -2 in the passing game. Keyshawn Vaughn was not active. Sean Tucker was. And this is the first time I think I've seen Sean Tucker active since like week 3. Mike Evans was at 72% snaps, 10 for 6 for 143 and touchdown. Chris Godwin was at 77% snaps, 6 for 4 for 54. Trey Palmer was at 83% snaps, 4 for 2 for 21. And then Cade Otton was at 95% snaps, 3 for 2 for 10. So Cade Otton would probably be a very interesting tight end too to be carrying into playoffs for me. Mike Evans, if you could buy him, yeah, in that boom bust, or I shouldn't even say boom bust range. He's probably a high end wide receiver 2 going forward. Going to have some weeks where he's capped. But at this point, he's going to have that high enough ceiling that he can go compete with like almost anybody in the league. Chris Godwin would be a sell to me. Um, Falling more and more into that wide receiver 3 range, with a pretty safe floor. Trey Palmer, and there, I don't know how much this is the passing of the torch at this point between these guys. I was looking it up that Mike Evans, he is in a contract year, and Godwin has one more year on his deal next year. So if they are interested in Trey Palmer, I don't know how much he's going to help anybody this year in fantasy, but definitely from a dynasty perspective, Trey Palmer's going to have a spike week. It's just going to be non-predictive. But I am more interested in the fact that he did have the highest amount of snaps of these 3 wide receivers. And then going back to Rachaad White, when it comes down to value, probably one of the more valuable guys in fantasy right now. Probably not going to be able to net you enough value to upgrade him significantly to those higher end guys. So when I look at where he falls as almost a top 10 guy, like I think he's more valuable than Kenneth Walker because of that receiving floor. More valuable than Saquon because I think there's a better chance that he scores touchdowns. We'll talk about Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery a little bit later. But when you get into that Austin Eckler, Travis Etienne range of guys, CMC, he's not going to be able to get you those guys back in a trade. That's just not going to happen. Those guys are not going to trade those guys. So again, if you're trying to sell him high, I don't know what you're going to get back in return. And on the other aspect of it, I don't know if you're going to go out to buy this guy. There's maybe a better chance that the owner of Rachaad White doesn't realize that he's basically an RB1 because of the running back landscape, if that makes any sense. Let's see. Again, rushing floor or red zone work and receiving work. Those are the 2 main things that we look for in a fantasy running back. Let's see. The defense is a hold this week, and they're and then we're going to stream them against San Francisco. I could pull that up so I can explain this better. So they have they're at San Francisco this week, so obviously I wouldn't be rolling them out there. But then they go at the Colts, and then Carolina, at Atlanta, at Green Bay. Maybe I would be rolling them out against Jacksonville in the semis, and maybe against New Orleans. But that patch of games that they have against the Colts, the Panthers, the Falcons, and the Packers, I think they're a weekly roll for 4 weeks. So if you're building that roster construction around these guys, that's 4 weeks that you don't have to be carrying 2 defenses after this week at San Francisco. So I don't want to be knife fighting for them in waivers next week. When they go against the Carolina Panthers, I want to hold them this week, knowing that I got a 4-game stretch to roll out the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and potentially have them give me that 40-degree day or better. All right. The Cardinals. So one of the problems that we had with Kyler Murray this week was that how rusty he was going to be going forward. And he was a little rusty. I did see that he missed Hollywood Brown in the end zone. He was at 97% snaps, 19 of 32, 249. Had a pick, another 3 for 33, and a tug. He was definitely nimbly bimbly out there. Clayton Tune did come in and vulture a touchdown. I was listening to some of the podcasts, and they were talking about like this should probably be going on more in the NFL where they take out some of these quarterbacks and then bring in other guys to do the sneaks. So like this could be something that they just do going forward. This may not be just necessarily a knee thing that would cut into the overall ceiling of Kyler Murray if they're not going to be using him for the quarterback sneaks. So James Conner was at 63% snaps, 16 for 73. And again, I don't know how much that the owner of James Conner is going to be selling. And if I was James Conner owner, how much I would be selling considering how dismal the landscape is at running back. Again, going out and getting a James Conner, he's going to be capped from a ceiling standpoint because of skill, no longer because of the offense. But from a floor standpoint, he's probably going to give you consistently just off of opportunity a 40-degree day. So getting in that RB2 range, just a guy that I would just really enjoy like setting into my lineup and forgetting about it because again, I don't know how many guys are going to want to upgrade their team with a James Conner. As I take a swig of green tea. Keontae Ingram was at 22%, 2 for 2 on the ground. Tony Jones, the cast off, was at 11% snaps, 1 for 13. The thing that I would be looking at is going forward, if I was going to be cuffing James Conner, is DeMercado. He was out this week, so that would be the guy that I would think is going to be the cuff going forward, just based off of the opportunity and usage when he's healthy. And I would be cuffing James Conner attached to this offense at this point. Hollywood Brown was at 100% snaps, 4 for 1 for 28. And again, Kyler Murray missed him on like a 30-yard touchdown. So he could have had a better day. At this point, I think he's going to be in my lineup as either that wide receiver 3 flex guy or even wide receiver 2. I think that, there are going to be better days ahead once that rust gets off of them. Again, I would be picking up Michael Wilson. He was at 6 targets, 3 for 34. I didn't write down his snap share. If you're really concerned, I think they were both up there relatively high. Rondé Moore, and this is why I wouldn't be worried about his snap share. Rondé Moore was at 65% snaps overall, so 8 for 5 for 43. And again, wide receiver 3s are not going to win you leagues. So Michael Wilson will in that wide receiver 2 flex range, but Rondé Moore probably will never be able to get through there. Trey McBride, again, unicorns do not grow on trees. 77% snaps, 9 for 8 for 131. His emergence in this offense may downgrade Hollywood Brown and Michael Wilson to that number 2 and number 3 option going forward, or it may be very unpredictable which guys finish at the top of every week. There's, from a fantasy perspective, good things and bad things to like about this guy. That outcome, they may not be predictive, but at the same time, they may have these ridiculously high ceilings that if I build my roster accordingly, I can have a guy that can win me weeks, but not hurt me at the same time, because I'm not expecting them to give me much of a floor. And then I just have written down for the defense, no, rest of season. I'm not even going to look that up. All right, the Chargers. So I've talked about this before with Justin Herbert. He's not an elite and he's not sub-elite if he can't get it done in certain weeks. But from a fantasy perspective, if I can predict the weeks that Justin Herbert doesn't get things done, and I'm talking in particular, as I can just bring this up, because he got it done in a week that did predict to be a shootout this week against the Detroit Lions, and then against the New York Jets. Again, elite guys like Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts will have the ability to at least give me a 40-degree day in a bad matchup. That means from a fantasy perspective, I can still stream around them. But in the case of a Justin Herbert, if he can't get me there in other weeks that to at least give me a 40-degree day, he may not even be in a sub-elite quarterback. And again, then I have to start making sure that I have the correct matchups to be rolling out at Justin Herbert. And that means weeks like Green Bay, maybe that's not going to be necessarily a bad defensive matchup, but from a game script perspective, he's not going to do the 27-40, 323 and 4 tugs, 1 pick, and then 4 for 15 on the ground. There's just not going to be enough plays and enough need for them to be throwing that much for him to get me home with the high passing volume. Baltimore may be a good offense, but they also might be a good defense, and I could maybe see that they have that Jets type week with Justin Herbert coming down the line week 12. The Patriots, not a good defense, but they are confusing to teams, which means that the overall ability for the Chargers to put up points is going to be in doubt. Again, we've already talked about Denver maybe being better. The Raiders may be better, and then they have the Bills, who are a bad defense and kind of struggling on offense. So if I'm looking at Justin Herbert right now, he would definitely be a sell to me, because there's only one real week that I'm like really excited to be rolling him out, and that would be the semis against Buffaloes. The other weeks, I think he's going to be closer to that 40-degree day with a kind of a cap ceiling because of game flow. And then there's other weeks where I'm like, I don't know. I would probably be streaming around him, like Baltimore, the Patriots. I might be streaming around him. Even Denver, after what Denver did to Josh Allen. And Josh Allen has the scrambling floor, has the rushing floor that I don't think Justin Herbert has. So that's just something to be aware of. Going forward, Austin Eckler, 69% snaps, 19 for 67, 7 for 4 for 48. And again, I'm interested in the receiving work. The receiving work gives me the floor. He didn't get the red zone work this week, but that's okay because he's got the receiving work, so he stays in there as that mid to high end RB1. Josh Kelly is the cuff, 31% snaps, 5 for 16. And at this point, maybe I would consider cuffing Eckler to Kelly, depending on what my other options are in my league. Keenan Allen did leave and come back in with a shoulder. That's something to be monitoring. He was at 14 targets, 11 for 175 and 2 tugs. Again, if not elite, then pretty close to it. and I don't know who would be selling, and I don't know who would be buying Keenan Allen at this point. Or excuse me, I don't know who would not be buying Keenan Allen, but I don't know how would you would get a hold of him or want to be selling him. Quentin Johnston was at 85% snaps, 4 for 4 for 34 and a tuck. And again, I think he's a sneaky buy this week, coming off waivers. His ability to potentially move into that wide receiver 2 role in this offense and potentially eat into that 14 for 11 for 175 that Keenan Allen did is very interesting to me because of the lack of capital it would cost me to look at him. And when we're looking at guys kind of like doing apples to apples, Quentin Johnston would compare kind of favorably to Rashee Rice, except the difference is I could see that Quentin Johnston with his snap share at 85%, that's not what Rashee Rice is getting at. So there's going to be maybe the possibility going into playoffs that Quentin Johnston is going to have a safer floor than Rashee Rice does, not going to be as touchdown dependent, which would move potentially Quentin Johnston into that wide receiver 2 role from a fantasy perspective versus like a Rashee Rice. And I can go out and I can get him now probably relatively for cheap. Jalen Guyton was at 79% zap, 6 for 4 for 41 and a touchdown. And again, some of that's going to be how the roles shake out down the line. Keenan Allen may be used less vertically, more underneath. And if they're designing certain plays for Quentin Johnston, I did see that he had some penalties drawn against him. So like they are using him down the field. It's just a matter of like when he hits. And I can, knowing that the Chargers are going to be a little bit more pass heavy, and in some of these scripts, I could definitely look ahead to predicting that he's going to have safer floors, higher spikes going down the line. Gerald Everett had a back injury that would put Donald Parham in the road for a streaming tight end. He was at 44% snaps, 2 for 2 for 18. And if Gerald Everett remains out and you're really tight end needy, then I would be rolling Donald Parham at this point. The defense does have some sneaky appeal as a week-to-week play, streaming around him. And again, so you could see rolling out the Chargers defense at Green Bay, at New England, maybe Denver, maybe Las Vegas. Even at this point, and I'm going to talk about this with defenses, turnover-prone quarterbacks are good plays, even if they're good offenses. So even in that game, you could be rolling the Chargers out. And then again, maybe the last week of the season and the chip at Denver, you could be rolling them. So the Chargers defense does have some appeal outside of week 12 Baltimore going forward. All right. The Chiefs were on bye. I'm still saying sell Pacheco based off his usage, and you're going to have to make that decision going down. I could see coming out of the bye that they really ride Pacheco harder. I could see that you already know what you're going to get out of Isaiah Pacheco at this point. McKinnon's going to eat into a snap share. CEH is going to get a little bit of work. CEH may be the cuff to Pacheco down the line. But again, like to upgrade Pacheco, and if we're looking to upgrade Pacheco, you know, a guy like Josh Jacobs would be on my list of guys that I could go get. Rashad White would be another guy that I would be looking at to upgrade from an Isaiah Pacheco if the other team that I'm trading with doesn't know what they have. Because in a lot of ways, Isaiah Pacheco is much closer to Brian Robinson. And if I can hunt you down Isaiah Pacheco, you could see that overall their numbers on a week-to-week basis are going to be more similar at the fantasy from a fantasy perspective. So Isaiah Pacheco is closer to Brian Robinson than we'd like to think. And what I'm thinking about doing to kind of illustrate my point, when I pull up the Chiefs and the Redskins, Isaiah Pacheco's snap share is hovering slightly higher than Brian Robinson is. But they're both hovering around that 50 to 60% range on a week-to-week basis. So they're much similar players overall than we probably would like to believe, even though like Brian Robinson has been dipping into the 30s. But I believe Isaiah Pacheco did have some negative scripts at certain points where he was dipping down there. So they are much closer overall from a fantasy perspective than maybe some people would like to believe that they are. So like even if I was to trade Isaiah Pacheco to upgrade another position and get Brian Robinson back in the process, they are very similar overall to each other moving forward. And I should be kind of aware of that. Like you can believe how I value guys or not. That's up to you. But this is how I would tend to end up valuing them. Moving forward, Rashee Rice is a sneaky buy. Again, I could see him potentially increasing his overall snap share and opportunity on a week-to-week basis, moving into that wide receiver 2 range. It's kind of the same argument that I would have for Quentin Johnston. At this point with Rashee Rice, I would kind of cap my expectations of him continuing to uh, uh, increase his overall opportunity on a week-to-week basis that would have him have a higher floor and higher ceiling. I think he's going to stay in this wide receiver 3 range. The guy that I would be looking at in deeper leagues attached to this Chiefs offense would be Justin Watson to see if he continues to be the Chiefs air yards leader going forward. And he's going to cost me a lot less than a Rashee Rice to find that out. And then if the defense did get dropped over the bye week, I think that they could be picked up and be a weekly play at this point, even in what would look like is an unfavorable matchup against the Eagles. And then after the Eagles, the Chiefs do have a rather favorable stretch of games. Again, at the Raiders, at Green Bay, Buffalo. Again, Josh Allen's a turnover machine. At the Pats, the Raiders again, and then I would be rolling them out probably all the way up until Cincinnati in the chip. So again, I would probably take the chance that they have a less than 40-degree day against the Eagles if I don't have the roster construction to carry 2 defenses to pick them up, because other teams might stay away from them because of that less than favorable matchup. That'd be something I would look at doing with the Chiefs, and I may actually do that in one of my leagues. All right. The Colts, remember this was a Frankfurt game in Germany, so take that with a grain of salt. And then the Colts do go on by. Gardner Minshew was 18 for 28, 194 and a pick. I don't think he's necessarily in streamer range anywhere more. I think he will have spike weeks. I think they will be non-predictive. Jonathan Taylor was up to 88% snaps, 23 for 69, and a touchdown, another 1 for 1 for 6. Because of the running back landscape, he is running back 1 at this point with that 88% snaps. Overall, I don't think he's going to get back to where he was a couple of years ago. So he is an RB2, and unless he's being used more consistently in the rushing game, or the Colts are good enough to support him scoring touchdowns every week, he's not actually anything more than a high-end running back 2. But again, I wouldn't be selling him because of the running back market, because I don't think I'm going to get anything back in return for him. There's not a comparable guy to getting 88% of the snaps in fantasy football and being the focal point of the offense. Zach Moss, obviously he's a sell at this point. May even be able to get him off of waivers. A guy in one of my leagues dropped him. He was at 16% snaps, only 1 for 2 on the ground. And again, if I have Zach Moss, I'd be trying to ransom him to the JT owner at this point, because that's about all he's good for. Or I'm hoping, if I'm the Zach Moss owner, that there's going to be an injury. And sometimes from a fantasy perspective, that's the best strategy for some of these guys. All right. Michael Pittman was at 95% snaps, 12 for 8 for 84. Probably in that wide receiver 2 type range if you're buying or selling. Josh Downs was at 25% snaps. Remember, he had a knee injury, 3 for 2 for 40. Alec Pierce, 96% snaps, 1 for 1 for 21. Outside of Dynasty, I don't think he has a lot of value, other than maybe in very deep leagues as a desperation play to maybe finally catch the air yards that are going to be out of him. Kyle Granson was back 49%, 2 targets. Alec Ogletree with his foot injury, and there's not a lot to talk about. I think Mo Alley-Cox led all the tight ends with snaps this week. The defense does have some appeal out of the bye week with Tampa Bay, and then at Tennessee with Will Levis. And they have been getting it done lately, especially against predictive matchups against quarterbacks. Let's see. Washington, Sam Howell, 29-44, 312, a touchdown, another 2 for 17. Not as much nimbly-bimly as we were predicting at the beginning of the year, but again, he's been better overall than we thought at football. And at this point, he's just a weekly set and forget. I wouldn't even try and guess the matchups with him versus Justin Herbert at this point. He's been kind of unpredictable when it comes to good matchups and bad matchups overall. B-Rob, again, I would just say at this point, he's your RB2 and deal with it. The same thing I said last week. 51% of snaps, 8 for 38 and 6 for 6 for 119 and touchdown. Gets it done somehow in the Scream game. And that would be the one thing I would say from a value perspective. If I'm trading Brian Robinson, I should understand what his ceiling and his floor are, and I would want to get something similar back. So if I was in a fantasy league where I could sell B-Rob for a Rashad White, that would be something that would interest me. But otherwise, like if I'm just moving him to get another RB2, again, there's risk involved with that, and I have to make sure I'm getting the right usage. Brian Robinson is going to be the red zone back. This offense is not going to be bad. He is getting some receiving work. So I can guess on a week-to-week basis that he's going to have ridiculous ceilings. And I was reading today that he's the only running back I think that's like finished his RB1 twice on the year. So that's just something that I would probably be holding on to, because what am I actually going to try and replace him with at this point? Antonio Gibson was at 48% snaps, 4 for 13, another 6 for 5 for 42, and a tug. And at this point, not only is Antonio Gibson a running back streamer, he's a high end cuff. He's probably one of the more valuable guys in all of fantasy going forward. I could roll him out there either as a flex during the bye weeks, or I could just keep him as this really low or higher ceiling, lower floor RB2 going forward. Antonio Gibson is not bad. And then I could be waiting for an injury with B-Rob, or I'm cuffing him against B-Rob. He's one of the more overall bench players, valuable bench players in fantasy. Scary Terry was at 87% snaps, 8 for 4 for 33. That would kind of downgrade him in my mind, that if I can't predict that he will just find a way to get it done versus a Courtland Sutton may have better value because of his red zone usage than Scary Terry. So Scary Terry for Courtland Sutton trade would be something I would be interested in, even though I think overall Scary Terry does have a higher week-to-week ceiling. Curtis Samuel's at 51% snap, remembering that he had a foot injury, 6 for 2 for 6. Johan Dotson was at 95% snaps, only 2 targets. Again, probably a little bit of unpredictability with this offense going forward. Logan Thomas, 74% snaps, 5 for 5 for 40. If I'm rolling Logan Thomas at this point as my tight end, I'm not going to get cute with him. I just realize that there are better guys out there, but if I'm rolling him, I'm going to miss when he does catch his touchdowns, trying to chase something else, chase the dragon someplace else. And then they do have the New York Giants this week, and that's going to be on you. I think it's a coin flip one way or the other if they're a top 5, top 10 defense. They sold both their defensive ends. They have a really bad secondary, but they were able the Giants are that bad on offense. If you're into that type of a dart throw coin flip type of thing. The Cowboys. So Dak Prescott is a mid to high end quarterback one rest of the season. 26 of 35, 404, 4 tugs, a pick, another 2 for 17 on the ground. If you have the ability to go out and buy a Dak Prescott at this point, versus some of the other guys out there, he's going to have a high enough ceiling to compete with your Josh Allens or Jalen Hurts down the line. I still think that there's going to be a little bit of volatility in his floor because of the defense and usage going on down the line, but he may be one of the only guys that can go out there like a George Kittle relative to a Travis Kelce and give you the ability to win the week when that other guy spikes, your opponent spikes. Tony Pollard was at 69% snaps, 15 for 55. I talked about Rico Dowdle yesterday in the Chasing the Dragon video. I think he's a priority pickup in waivers. He was at 28% snaps, 12 for 29, a touchdown. And then I went back and I looked at when he was playing, and he indeed was getting actual work when the game was still competitive. So he just didn't come in late and get 12 touches in garbage time. He was being used in the first quarter. He was being used in the third quarter when it was still relatively close, 28-7. So like he was being sprinkled in there with Pollard still being out there, and they were giving him actual opportunities when he was coming in the game. And with Tony Pollard being ineffective or inefficient, I could definitely see that Rico Dowdle's role will increase on top of being probably one of the top overall cuffs in fantasy land. CD Lamb, you ain't buying. Another 14 targets, 11 receptions, 151 and a touchdown. And then he got home on a 14-yard rushing touchdown. And I don't see any way that I would be selling him, and I don't see any way anybody would or you're going to be able to buy him off of anybody. He's one of those elite type unicorns going forward. I talked about Brandon Cooks yesterday in Chasing the Dragon. He's only at 53% snaps, which is another good indication that I would not be buying him. 10 for 9 for 173 and a touchdown. Again, I think this is going to be non-predictive from their pass catching standpoints. But if you are trying to see how this works out going down the line, there are worse stashes that you could go out there and put at the bottom of your bench hoping that you magically have a wide receiver 2 attached to a very good offense going forward. Michael Gallup was at 47% snaps, 2 for 2 for 70 a tug, and I kind of think that's going to be how it goes forward between the two of those guys, that they're just going to be rotating the two of them, and then that allows them to really open up CD Lamb. So from a real football perspective, translating into fantasy football, their ability to move Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup around to put CD Lamb where they want CD Lamb to be, in the slot or out wide whenever they want to get him the football, is probably what allows CD Lamb to be so valuable from a fantasy perspective. And that means Cooks and Gallups are just not going to be predictive at all from a fantasy perspective. Jake Ferguson was at 67% snaps, 7 for 4 for 26 and a tug. Again, low end to mid range tight end one. I talked about him earlier in the season, and at this point, I would guess on a week-to-week basis, he's going to be the predictive number 2 option in this passing offense. So I think he does have a lot of value going on. And then the defense, I have written down that they go Giants at Carolina, Washington, and then a rough stretch into week 13 into the chip. So I will talk about that going forward. They have, if you have the Cowboys, and even this would be something I would think about, like, if I have the Cowboys and then the Browns owner, trading the Cowboys to the Browns owner would be something I'd be interested. So they go week 14, Philadelphia, week 15 at Buffalo, week 16, Miami, week 17, Detroit. And again, I would also be very comfortable rolling them out against these teams with how they've performed, but I also could understand why I wouldn't want them during the stretch. And they even have week 13, the Seattle Seahawks. So like that's another good roll, or another iffy roll one way or the other. It may be a good roll because the Seahawks haven't been as good on offense as potentially was predicted, but at the same time, the Seahawks do have the ability to have a good week like they did this week. So again, something to be paying attention to if I'm the Dallas Cowboys owner going forward. All right, the Dolphins were on bye. I would be selling Mostert with Achane coming back from IR. They opened his practice window. I have not seen if they've activated him yet, but it's something to be paying attention to. It's also worth paying attention to how the backfield's going to shake out with the active inactive with Jeff Wilson, Solomon Ahmed. Their number 3, number 4 guy is on IR with the ankle injury, so that's another guy to be paying attention to. I can pull him up, so I'm just not sitting here forgetting Chris Brooks. He's on IR with an ankle injury and moved to so there's a chance that he's going to come back, which means that there's going to be 5 potential running backs. So paying attention to the active inactives going forward. And again, that would mean that if there's a guy dealing with an injury, the Dolphins have the ability to just go, you know what, take the week off, come back next week. We have 5 guys that we could roll out there and give touches to. So this is all stuff to be paying attention to. And from a fantasy standpoint, trying to guess who's going to get opportunities, let alone who's actually going to be active, is going to get harder and harder to do. The only guy that I would probably want to have pieces of at this point is Achane because of how ridiculously efficient he is. Right now, even with all the time that he's missed in a relatively limited sample size, he's the number 1 overall running back from fantasy on a week-to-week basis, with the 51 points, 27 and 21 in those 3 main games that he did play before the knee injury. So like outside of me guessing that the Dolphins are going to try and feature him again, the other guys I think do have some volatility to them. So I would be selling Mostert. And again, from a fantasy perspective with Mostert, his overall production has dipped going on or the last few weeks, and that's without Achane being in the lineup. Now Achane is coming back to cut into the opportunity. So again, a guy like Mostert may be moving more into the RB3 range, and he's definitely not RB1 in one way or another. So if I can move a Mostert in one direction, again, trying to get a Rachaad White would be a guy I would be interested in. B-Rob may actually have more value than Raheem Mostert. A running back needy team upgrading my wide receivers, an Ayuk and a Mostert for, I would even say like Devontae Adams would be something that would be interesting to me. Again, overpaying to upgrade your lineup to give you the opportunity to win. It's the same risk that you would be taking to win your league that would be to lose your league if you're worried about overall value of guys. Chase Claypool coming out of the bye is a stash that I would be looking for to see if there's a big change in usage. Again, possibility of him moving in that wide receiver 2 range. And their wide receiver 3s grow on trees, wide receivers 2 do not. So having a guy that could potentially be the beneficiary of teams trying to take away Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Chase Claypool would be something interesting, especially depending on how the running game shakes out for the Dolphins. Teams are adjusting to the Dolphins going forward. Their defense does have some appeal. Raiders at the Jets, at Redskins, Tennessee, the Jets, and then I just have written down no for the semis of the chip. I'm not even going to really look them up. The Eagles are on bye. They're coming out of bye. I do think Swift is a sell at this point based off his usage. So if you're wondering about him going into the buys or coming out of the bye with the trade deadline coming, overall, he hasn't hit the usage numbers that we've been kind of looking for. He's not overly being used in the running game. Kenneth Gainwell's eating into him a little bit. So again, realizing that he's capped when it comes to a week-to-week standpoint, he's not going to be able to compete with other running back ones. To potentially be able to move him in a deal that gives me something back and upgrade, knowing that there's a potential outcome for him not winning me my league. And as I talked about this before with the Eagles, Rashad Penny was active this last game, and I could definitely see him being more of a week-to-week play and his style, that grinding style, cutting into the other running backs going forward. And stashing Rashad Penny for a week to see how he plays out is going to cost me relatively nothing. Instead of trying to knife fight for him next week on waiver wire when he actually pops. Again, pick him up, wait to see if he's active. He's not active, pick somebody else up. If he is active, see how he rolls out. And then you're going to have an idea of what he's going to be going forward down the line. That's what I would rather have Rashad Penny versus moving DeAndre Swift. This is just me. You run your own team. But I would look at that going forward. What can I get back for putting DeAndre Swift on the market and stashing a Rashad Penny? That would probably be something I would be interested in. You're not going to get an AJ Brown. He's elite. But with the Dallas Goedert injury, Devontae Smith is a guy that not only do I think Devontae Smith is a wide receiver 2 rest of season, at least with until Dallas Goedert gets back, I could definitely see with Devontae Smith moving into that low end wide receiver 1 range because of those vacated targets from Goddard. But remember, with Devontae Smith, vacated targets tend to go to running backs, and I'm going to contradict myself right now. That would mean that potentially DeAndre Swift has more value coming out of the bye. There's no Dallas Goedert news that I could find. Albert O would be the tight end to look at. I think that there are better overall tight ends to go chasing what potentially would end up being the number 3 or number 4 option in this Eagles offense that was already hard enough to predict before, when I think they were trying to get the football to Dallas Goedert. I don't know how much they're going to try and get the ball to Albert O. And then with the defensive schedule for the Eagles, I would just say no, because they haven't been that good. They go Chiefs, Bills, San Francisco, Dallas, Seattle, the Giants, and then Arizona. So if I was to hold the Eagles, it would be knowing that I'm rolling them out in the semifinal game against the Giants, and everything else I'm not that interested in. So if you can build your roster in such a manner that you could hold a defense for a semifinal role, that's on you. Let's see. So from the Falcons standpoint, I hate Arthur Smith in real football, and I also hate him in fantasy. Taylor Heineke was at 69% snaps, 8 for 15 for 55 and a touchdown, and then another 4 for 34 and then he left with a hammy. Desmond Ridder came in, did 31% snaps, 4 for 6 for 39, and then another 3 for 11 and a tug. Now remember, they're going into the bye, and Arthur Smith said they will not name a starter until after the bye, and they can evaluate Taylor Heineke's hamstring. So I'm not sure that either one of them is necessarily better than the other from a fantasy perspective for the toys, but I hate Arthur Smith. That's all I can tell you. So Bijan was at 75% snaps, 22 for 95 and a touchdown, another 2 for 1 for 11. He did have 4 red zone carries. Now, temper your expectations when I say this, because Tyler Algier was at 27% snaps, 9 for 31. He also had 4 red zone carries in this game. So that touchdown that Bijan got could have gone to Algier, or those red zone carries that Algier got could have gone to Bijan and could have made him an RB1. He's still going to remain as that high-end RB1 or RB2, low-end RB1. Do I trust this offense enough to go buy Bijan or sell him? I brought this up last week. It's the same process. you may sell him and lose your league. You may buy him and lose your league. You may win either way. You kind of have to take that risk based off the value that you're sending. But again, like sending a DeAndre Swift to the Bijan owner or vice versa, either way, I think I would rather have Bijan than DeAndre Swift, and I think there's enough value there one way or another that I can hedge my bets if I were to make the right move to get a hold of these guys. Tyler Algier, I still think is a very high value cuff to the Bijan owner. I no longer think he has any standalone appeal. I haven't thought that for a while, but I would be cuffing him if I was the Bijan owner. Correll Patterson was at 31 overall percent snaps, 3 for 13, 2 for 2 for 7. And again, I don't trust anything because when you're getting usage like that, like Bijan should just be getting high efficiency carries and a whole bunch of targets. And that's just not how they're using them because Arthur Smith is stupid. Drake London was at 77% snaps, 4 for 3 for 36. Again, I don't trust this. Again, Van Jefferson was down to 37% snaps, only had 1 target. I don't trust any of this. Kyle Pitts was at 70% snaps, 5 for 3 for 30. I think there are better guys to be rolling out there, especially with like Jonas Smith doing 44% snaps, 2 for 1 for 1. There are better guys to be rolling out there than any of these guys because even if you're trying to catch the ceiling, there's just as good a chance that you're going to get overall burn. So I wouldn't be rolling Pitts out, outside of like just trying to catch that ceiling. And again, with Drake London, same thing. Probably in that like wide receiver 3 range. Wide receiver 3s grow on trees. If someone rolled Drake London out against me, I would think that I have a better opportunity to win my week versus them as being rolled out as a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 flex. And I have, once again, you can trust the Falcon players if you want, but I would not want to try and predict this mess in the playoffs. And that's the biggest thing. Rolling into the playoffs, if you're trying to roll your Falcons pieces out in the playoffs, you probably snuck your way into the playoffs, and all you're going to have to win your league is to get lucky with coin flips with your Falcons pieces. And the defense does have an interesting schedule, so I will talk about them. So out of the bye, they have the Saints. Who knows what's going on with them? The Jets, or I would think about rolling them with the how bad the Jets' offense have been. Tampa Bay, Baker May can be a turnover machine. The Panthers, again, they're not very good with Bryce Young. The Colts, Gardner Minshew, and I even going up against the Bears in the final with Justin Fields may not be a bad option. But primarily, I would be streaming around the Falcons and another defense if I have to go forward, trying to pick and choose when to be rolling them out. The Giants, and believe this or not, and I should really be careful when I talk about this with the Giants. So Tommy DeVito this week at the Redskins has a lot of streaming appeal because the Redskins have no secondary and the Redskins don't have a pass rush. So Tommy DeVito, who 2 weeks ago at Las Vegas did 15 for 20, 175 and a touchdown, and has a little nimbly bimbly, 7 for 41 against Dallas. So in your super flex leagues, Tommy DeVito is an interesting role this week against the Redskins. He only did 14 for 27, 86, did throw 2 touchdowns late in the game, or one early, one late, had a pick, and does have some rushing floor. So again, and I have this written down, fine line between crazy and good, rolling Tommy DeVito out this week. Saquon Barkley, only 61% snaps, 13 for 66, 3 for 1 for -5. And unfortunately, if you're a Barkley owner, you would want to maybe have this game take place after the Redskins game to sell high. But I would also be looking at selling Barkley. I just don't know when you're going to get the ability to roll him out against a team that's not going to try and take him away primarily. And again, even if they're checking it down to him, those three targets, one catch for -5 yards. So that means they know when he's out running a route, he's the number one, and the offense is so bad that like they would rather take him away than some of the other guys. But we're going to talk about some of the other guys. So if you're into cuffing Barkley, Braid is the guy, 23% snaps, 1 for 3. I wouldn't be interested in cuffing Barkley. I would be interested in trading Barkley, treating him as that high-end RB2 for another guy, and to bring up what's his face? Rashad White again. Another guy I would be looking at is Josh Jacobs to turn it around. There's a lot to like with Josh Jacobs when we get to him. So like a Barkley for Josh Jacobs, throwing something else into that mix to get you a Josh Jacobs moving forward would be something I would be interested in doing. And then from a wide receiver perspective, going into the Giants week, those dart throws as your wide receiver 2 / wide receiver 3 flex. Slayton was at 79% snaps. Wan'Dale Robinson was at 47% snaps. Isaiah Hodgins was at 60% snaps, did have 2 targets. Jalen Hyatt did leave with a concussion, but he led all receivers in air yards on his 1 target. So if the 3 guys from the Giants perspective that I would be interested in streaming this week, Tommy DeVito because of the matchup, Jalen Hyatt if he clears concussion, and then Daniel Bellinger was at 81% snaps, and I've been talking a lot about Daniel Bellinger since the Darren Waller injury. He was at 3 for 232. And again, he's going to be that high-end streamer, low-end or high-end streamer this week, maybe weekly starter going forward for the Giants. So I really like Daniel Bellinger. He was fantasy relevant last year. I brought this up in the past. And especially this week against the Redskins, I could definitely see him being a top 10 tight end. And then the defense does have some appeal. Make sure I got this right. They do have some appeal week 12 going up against the Patriots. Remember, bad offenses just roll out who's ever against them. The Colts did have 2 pick sixes against Carolina. I could definitely see that and then the Colts did follow that up with I think the number 2 overall fantasy week against the Patriots. So rolling out anybody against the Patriots is not a bad idea from a streaming standpoint. So picking up the Giants defense, if you're going to do that this week instead of doing it next week, may not be a bad idea. The Jags, T-Law against the 49ers, 17 for 29, 185, 2 picks and a fumble loss. Again, I don't even think he's streamable at this point. And I have written down some teams that we thought we were going to be good are going to be bad. And at very least with the Jags, they will not be predictive. And to finish off my point against Tommy DeVito, I would rather stream Tommy DeVito against the Redskins than trust Trevor Lawrence against whoever he plays this week. I didn't even write down who Trevor Lawrence plays because I'm so I don't think you can predict it. He actually goes up against Tennessee, and I would rather stream Tommy DeVito as my starting quarterback in a 1-quarterback league than try and predict what the outcome of Trevor Lawrence will be against the Titans going forward. So you run your team the way you want. ETN, these are all disappointments in this blowout. ETM 61% snaps, 9 for 35, 4 for 2 for 9. What would bother me about Travis Etienne is if they can't figure out a way to get him involved in the passing game, in what would be essentially be a negative script, that kind of bothers me a little bit with him. But there are so few guys that we could even put the label as running back ones on this year. He's still got to stay there, even if I think that the offense is going to be non-predictive going forward. Tank Bigsby was at 18% snaps, 3 for 5 for 1 target, and Dearness Johnston was at 21% snaps, 3 for 12, another 2 for 2 for 28. Not only do I not think that Tank Bigsby is the ETN cuff, I think this is a pretty good indication of what the Jags think of Bigsby going forward from a dynasty perspective. Calvin Ridley was at 91% snaps, 3 for 2 for 20, and he's going to be in that boom bust wide receiver 3 range. Probably has just enough value to not make him droppable, but I would be moving on from him other than maybe I get lucky and he has one of those weeks if I have him slotted in my flex wide receiver 3 type range. Christian Kirk is the guy that I would want going forward in this offense. 89% snaps, 11 targets, 6 receptions, 104, lost a fumble. Again, he's probably going to be that low to mid-range wide receiver 3, and Calvin Ridley is going to be that boom bust wide receiver 3. Christian Kirk's going to be that low end to mid range wide receiver 2, and Calvin Ridley is going to be the boom bust wide receiver 3. So I would be moving Ridley. Anything that I can get for Ridley at this point is probably going to have more value than him going forward. Outside of if I'm trying to catch that spike week. Zay Jones, there's no injury news, but it doesn't matter because he got arrested for domestic violence. So yeah, I think he's probably done for the year at this point between the injury and that. Evan Ingram was at 86% snaps, 7 for 4 for 12. And again, I think there's a little bit of a problem. Or I think Evan Ingram is a fine tight end, but I think overall his ceiling is going to be capped versus definitely some of these other guys that are out there in the elite range. And that means that on a week-to-week basis, I can stream against Evan Ingram and feel very comfortable So if I can upgrade my Evan Ingram shares to a solid, more solid floor guy, and I'll talk about like Michael Mayer later on in this thing, I would probably be doing that, even though I realize that on a good week to week basis, he will be a tight end one going forward. And then from a defensive perspective, I do say like they can be rolled out against Tennessee, and then I probably wouldn't touch them again until the semis at Tampa Bay. So like if I'm a Jaguars owner, I'm probably throwing them away after this week. So I should plan accordingly going forward. The Jets. So Zach Wilson was 23 for 39, 263, a pick, 4 for 5 or 4 carries, 54 yards, fumble, didn't lose it. He's a low end streamer in 2 quarterback leagues. He's not good at football. The pick that he threw late in the game came from him staring down the receiver, and I think Garrett Wilson was open on the other side. And then the linebacker just watched his eyes and jumped in front. He's not good at football. And the other problem is the Jets are badly coached. Breece Hall was at 70% snaps. There's just no creativity on how they're trying to get him football, running him in the back of the offensive line. 13 for 28, another 3 for 3 for 47. Probably is a low end or a high end running back too, because of how he's attached to the offense in a very similar condition as Saquon. Dalvin Cook was at 15% snaps. May be a cuff if you're into that type of thing, because they released Michael Carter today. So the other thing with Michael Carter getting released is if he clears waivers in your league, which I imagine he would be, I would just be picking him up to see where he lands. And because he might go to a better situation, definitely a better situation than he was with the Jets. And knowing ahead of time that it's going to cost me nothing just to throw him on the bottom of my roster and wait around for a couple days to see where he goes. This was a guy that was fantasy relevant 2 years ago and had a little bit of fantasy relevance last year when Breece Hall went down. And I wouldn't cuff the Jets or Breece Hall. I don't think Dalvin Cook or the offense is good enough to be cuffing Breece Hall. But if you were to cuff Breece Hall, now the cuff would be Dalvin because of the release of Michael Carter. Garrett Wilson is hovering around as a high-end wide receiver 2 attached to a bad quarterback and bad coaching. 94% snaps, 14 for 9 for 93. Almost came down with the Hail Mary in the end zone. Tyler Conklin is hanging around like low-end tight end one land. 64% snaps, 7 for 7 for 70. Again, probably better guys because there's just not going to be opportunities for him to score touchdowns. And the defense has a tough schedule with a bad offense. We'll talk about them. I could definitely see them getting dropped. They probably can be rolled out any given week against any matchup because of how good they are. They probably can be rolled against Buffalo, as I talked about with like the Broncos. Turnover prone quarterbacks, turnover machine quarterbacks, any team can be rolled against them, even if it's a good offense. And the Jets are good enough. Like Miami might be a roll. Atlanta, they might be a roll. Houston, CJ Stroud probably wouldn't be rolling them out. But again, Miami twice, that's a good offense. It could go either way. The Redskins could be a good offense. Cleveland, maybe not a matchup I would be rolling them out against. So like if I'm rolling the Jets, I'm probably would be holding them and streaming around them and trying to guess. And again, from a fantasy perspective, I don't like guessing. But like you do you. All right, Lions. Goff, 23 for 33, 333, two touchdowns. I think he is a streamer because again doesn't have the nimbly bimbly, and he may have, well, he did at least in this game. He is going to have touchdowns vultured from him by the running backs. David Montgomery was at 38% snaps, 12 for 116, 75 yards, a touchdown. He did have 4 red zone carried, and I'm a little worried about the snaps. Jamar Gibbs was at 58% snaps, 14 for 77, 2 touchdowns. 2 of them came on 1-yard plunges, 5 for 3 for 35, 5 red zone carries, and 1 red zone target. So what I think is going to go on going forward is this is going to be a very non-predictive backfield usage, hot hand, maybe overall split, 50-50, like who knows, which means that like any given week you roll out one of these running backs, you could get burned. And any given week that you roll out one of these running backs, you could finish with the overall RB1 of the week. And depending on who you're trading them for, again, they're going to be attached to a good offense, which means more opportunities to score touchdowns. Depending on if you're going to be trading for them because the owner's worried, because the owner should be worried, or if you're going to trade for them, knowing that they could absolutely win you a week or absolutely lose you a week. Again, the same process that could lose you your league is the same process that will win your league. Let's see. The Sun guy was at 92% snaps, 9 for 8 for 156 and a touchdown. Um, if we were worried about Jamison Williams, like it doesn't help this week, it doesn't hurt this week. He was at 52% snaps, 2 for 2 for 18. He's operating as the de facto wide receiver 3 behind Josh Reynolds, who was at 70% snaps and had 4 targets. Donovan Peoples-Jones was inactive, so I'm less worried about Donovan Peoples-Jones eating into Jamison Williams, but I don't think Jamison Williams, at least this year from a fantasy perspective, is viable. And again, the pecking order looks like right now you're going to have the Sun God, Laporta, and then Gibbs as the top 3 receivers in this offense. Laporta was at 80% snaps, 5 for 4 for 40. Again, probably in that low end or mid-range tight end range value. I don't think he's ever going to go back to what he was at the beginning of the year. I think he's going to be a little tight or touchdown dependent. Again, if he's not the number 1 in this offense, that's okay from a fantasy perspective. But like having a guy that can go out there in the playoffs and knife fight with a Travis Kelce or a George Kittle has some value. I don't know if he'll ever be back to that tier, but overall, if I have Sam Laporta, I'm happy. If someone comes buying, I want to know what they're offering because I would sell in a good trade. The defense schedule, I have just all the way up to the chip. And remember, they haven't been a particularly good offense or defense, but they're attached to a good offense that could put them in good positions. The Bears, especially if Justin Fields back, or Tyson Bagent, I'd be rolling them against the Bears. The Packers, Jordan Love's not good at football. The Saints have been all over the place. The Bears again. Denver hasn't been good. They may not be bad anymore, but they haven't been good. Josh Dobbs is a turnover machine. So yeah, they have some weekly appeal going forward that I would be streaming around when it comes to the Lions. The Pack. Jordan Love, not good at football. Doesn't matter from a fantasy perspective. 21 for 40, 289, 2 tugs, 2 picks, another 2 for 11 on the ground. Going to be a non-predictive streamer. Aaron Jones, 56% snaps, 13 for 35, 6 for 4 for 19, 3 red zone carries and a red zone target. So does have some appeal going forward to buy if the owner is squeamish about him. AJ Dillon is back into the discussion as a weekly use. 50% snaps, 9 for 70, 3 for 1 for 1, or 3 for 1 for 11, and did have 2 red zone carries. So both of the Packers running backs have some weekly appeal, standalone, and then obviously Dillon would handcuff Aaron Jones again. And again, not a good offense with split usage, including the red zone. I would be outside of if you're a really running back needy team, I would be selling these guys. Otherwise, I would be buying them. I might actually roll AJ Dillon out in a league where I need a running back for a 1 week rental. So that, just to give you an indication of how things are going. That AJ Dillon could be a weekly roll, and I'm selling the backfield at the same time. Let's see. Christian Watson, 75% snaps, 7 for 2 for 23, 91 air yards. And I like all the air yards. I just do not like what's going on with the offense. Romeo Dobbs, 82% snaps, 5 for 3 for 31, a tug, 83 air yards. Jaden Reed, 51% snaps, 5 for 5 for 84, and a tug. Fumble not lost. Dontavian Wicks was at 44% snaps, 4 for 351, fumble not lost. And again, being able to predict where this is going, I would rather, from a fantasy perspective, just know that like someone's going to get a whole bunch of targets, even if they're bad targets. Garrett Wilson comes to mind. If this was Garrett Wilson, I'd be buying Garrett Wilson. But this isn't, which means from a fantasy perspective, I can't trust any of these guys. So I just don't want any of them. So I could definitely see. I think I've seen some people talk about, is Christian Watson droppable? You do you, but I bet someone else would be still buying him as part of a trade. Have them be somebody else's problem, not mine. The guy that I would be picking up is Luke Musgrave, 74% snaps, 4 for 2 for 64, 71 air yards, and 2 red zone targets. So definitely as a stash moving into the playoffs, Luke Musgrave may be the beneficiary of all this nonsense. And again, a tight end cannot lose me my week. He can only win me my week. Again, and I have written down, again, bad coaching, not good quarterback play. The defense does have some appeal weeks 14 through 16. At the Giants, Tampa Bay, and at Carolina. So be advised with that. Like I could be picking them up in the next week or so to stash to know that I have this run going forward. The Panthers, I just have no from a fantasy perspective. This is a mess. I watched this game. Again, Bryce Young, I don't even know if we can evaluate him at all from a fantasy perspective. But they may already be breaking their number one overall draft pick. He was 21 to 38, 185 and 3 for 18 on the ground. Chuba Hubbard was at 50% snaps, 9 for 23, another 2 for 2 for 16. Miles Sanders was at 38% snaps, 2 for -5, another 2 for 2 for 15. And then Rasheem Blackshear comes in at 12% snaps, 2 for 7, and another 1 for 6. So bad offense, split backfield. Don't want any part of it. I think you can move on. If a guy like Chuba has a week, it's going to be non-predictive at this point. And if someone is rolling them out as like a running back too, because out of desperation, you're really hoping that you can get lucky in some way, shape, or form. They're not going to get you to the red zone for him to get the red zone work. The passing floor that you would want to see is being split up between 3 guys, and then the overall rushing yardage isn't even going to be there, and that's the gravy from a fantasy perspective because there's 3 guys taking it away as part of a bad offense. Let's see, and then the next 4 weeks they have Dallas at Tennessee with their good run stopping, good defensive line. Tampa Bay still got a good run stopping defense, and then at New Orleans, who can is a good defense, stops the run. So again, I don't want any part of this backfield. Either if you can sell any pieces of it, and I'm talking about Chuba in particularly, I would be doing that. Otherwise, yeah, I think they're pretty close to a drop. Ghost of Adam Thielen, 10 for 6 for 42. He's a volume-based RB3 with limited upside, only 37 air yards. Guys like Jonathan Mingo, 98% snaps, 7 for 3 for 20, have more interest, but this is a bad offense. So I'm selling Adam Thielen going forward. Mike Stretchen, 22% snaps, 2 for 1 for 45. He may actually help the offense going forward. So if you can't find an Adam Thielen buyer, you could hold on to him and hope that Strachan and Mingo can open up Adam Thielen going forward into the playoffs. The defense I just have written down. Nope. Patriots mess. Mac Jones, 15 for 20, 170, a bad pick late. Bailey Zappi is not an upgrade into the pieces in this offense. And I don't even know if Mac Jones is going to be the starter or not be the starter at this point. They haven't even committed to that today. Ramondre is at 76% snaps, did have a back injury, came back in, 20 carries, 88 yards, another 5 for 3 for 14. But Zeke at 33% snaps hurts him, 13 for 54, 2 for 2 for 34. And maybe with Ramondre, that would be a guy that I would be buying at this point. With the bye coming up, maybe you could get a hold of Ramondre. Maybe the offense is bad enough. Maybe there's enough there that he could sneak your way into being relevant during the playoffs, running him as an RB2. That would be something that you could maybe think about doing if you're that desperate. Demario Douglas, like I said, 72% snaps, 9 for 6 for 84. A lot of that came on a fake Hail Mary. Horizontal targets are not as good from a fantasy perspective as vertical targets. So his ability to score touchdowns is going to be limited, which means if you're rolling him out there in this, even as a wide receiver 3, he's just gonna. You're hoping for a 40-degree day. Juju was at 90% snaps, 1 for 1 for 9. And then the reason why I bring this up is because any opportunity of Jalen Raver being, I think he only had 1 snap in this game. Hunter Henry, 72% snaps, 5 for 3 for 21, and Gesicki, 67% snaps, 3 for 2 for 22. There's just nothing to be catching outside of Ramondre. That's the only potential get out of all of this is just maybe Ramondre is a buy. And the other thing is he's attached to a bad offense. So, even if he's a potential buy, he's also a potential sell. Same process that'll win your league, will lose your league. The defense has a buy, but they could be rolled out week 12 at the Giants. Again, really bad offense. The Patriots are going to be well coached enough that maybe they can get you be a 1-week rental. So this would be the week to be picking up the Patriots defense instead of waiting until next week to pick them up off of waivers. If you have money, this is another thing to talk about from a strategy standpoint. If you have money left over, this is a good week to be throwing it all away, including to go out and buy the Giants defense next week. So you don't necessarily have to be picking them up proactively. If you have money left, you're just running out of opportunities to spend that money, and you don't get bonus points for keeping your fab money, into the offseason. So either use it now in a good week to use it, or you can wait a week and just dump a ridiculous amount of money on a streaming defense, that is something to be looking at if you're not trying to be proactive on a middle of the road defensive matchup. AOC, and I hate calling him that, but that's what we're calling him now. Aiden O'Connell was at 16 for 27, 153 in a tug, a pick, and a fumble not lost. Again, he's going to be serviceable rest of the season. So there's only two guys that I really care about from a passing perspective here. That's Davante Adams at 97% snaps, 13 targets for 6 receptions, 86 yards. I don't care how the sausage is made. That's going to put Davante back into that land of being a high-end 2, low-end wide receiver 1. That's what I paid for him to be. So again, I think it's okay to be buying Davante Adams at this point. Moving forward, the other guy that I'm interested in all of this was Michael Mayer, 88% snaps, 5 for 3 for 19, a tug, and design shot to the end zone for him to go up the ladder and go get it. Things that I like. So a low volume passing offense can't support 2 wide receivers. It can support a wide receiver and a tight end because tight ends can't lose me my week. So Michael Mayer would be a buy going forward if he can be in that 5 to 7 targets a game range, which he should be at. He can be not just a streamer, but he can be a low end tight end 1 going forward. So depending on how bad I'm chasing tight ends, that would be a guy to look at. And then with the spike weeks, because there are going to be spike weeks where Aiden O'Connell is forced to be in a negative script. And I actually had that written down so I can talk about that. The Raiders are going to be in games coming forward where they can't just go, allow him to only to check the ball down. So they're going to play Miami this week, the Chiefs, Minnesota, the Chargers, the Chiefs. Going forward, these are going to be games where they might have to make Aiden O'Connell put the team on his back and win, which means the passing volume is going to go up, which means Michael Mayer goes from the possibility to not win me my week to having the ability to move into the higher range of tight ends for this period of time for the Raiders offense. Let's see. So Josh Jacobs is a buy if you can get a hold of him. 83% snaps, 27 for 116, 2 for 2 for 11, 2 fumbles, 1 was lost. He is in that mid to high end running back range. And especially now that the offense looks like it's at least serviceable, I'm less concerned with him on a week-to-week basis. So hopefully you bought him earlier or not. I don't know if anybody would be selling him, but yeah, he's in the limited land from a overall value perspective of running back 1s. So Josh Jacobs is down there outside of the top 10, but rest of the season, I would put him as like a top 5 running back going forward. And there's going to be so few of those guys. Again, McCaffrey, maybe Kamara, ETN. I don't know where Kieran Williams, he could be a wide running back 1, or he could be a running back 3 to finish the season off. Austin Eckler. And then after Austin Eckler, the 2 other guys that I would put into the category of being running back 1s going to finish the season off are Rachaad White and Josh Jacobs from a volume aspect. And if the Raiders offense can get good enough where Josh Jacobs can score touchdowns consistently, then he is has the potential ability, and he wouldn't be a league winner because of where he was going in the drafts, but he does have the ability to return on investment. And if you can buy low, then buy low. But I don't know, like I said, who would be selling him at this point. White's still the cuff, but I think he'll be Zamir White would be the cuff. Only 2% snaps, 1 for 5. I do think he'll be limited to cuff Jacobs because Amir Abdullah would probably take over all that receiving work. 16% snaps, 1 for 4. So you're looking at 60% of Josh Jacobs if he goes down and you've cuffed him to Zamir White. Jacoby Myers at 91% snaps, 2 for 21. Hunter Henry, 42% snaps. Trey Tucker, if we're following Trey Tucker, he was down to 23% snaps. So whatever trend line I was looking at from Trey Tucker, I'm less excited about. It's the passing volume is not going to be there. And then he's not even being phased into the offense. The new coaching staff, Antonio Pierce, is moving Hunter Renfrow back into the wide receiver 3 role. And I don't think Jacoby Myers is really going to be a thing going forward unless you can try and maybe roll him out in those higher passing volume games that the Raiders have going forward. The defense I have no until the chip, and I want to check, and that would be at Indianapolis if you're looking to roll them out. Otherwise, all those other games predict as shootouts, and then that's going to be a little bit harder to kind of guess with the offense not being good enough to put them in that range where the defense can just pin their ears back. All right, the Rams, and this is a really long one today. The Rams, no news on Matthew Stafford other than they think that he'll be ready for Week 11. I think Carson Wentz being brought in helps for Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua going forward to remain as mid to high end wide receiver twos. So even if Stafford can't play or goes down again, I think that Wentz could get you to the finish line with those guys. As long as you realize that like they're going to eat into each other, so that means that they're not going to be wide receiver ones. So if someone wants to pay you for them like they're wide receiver ones, then like yeah, I would definitely look at doing that. Kieran Williams is eligible to return from IR week 12. I don't know who would be buying him at this point. If someone's just trying to get him off their roster, you may have an RB1. He may return to a running back by committee with Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman. I could also see him going back with Ronnie Rivers coming off IR to that 70-80% split with the valuable touches, and Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman are kicked back to the street. So be advised that, again, the same process, get one of your league, could lose your league. So whether or not you're buying an injured Kieran Williams, and I normally would say don't buy injured players, sell injured players. Again, there's a lot of risk involved with this. The Ravens. My feelings about Lamar Jackson as a real NFL player or real NFL quarterback, and what the Ravens have been doing to develop him as a passer or as a quarterback. All I'm going to say is, there may not be higher players with higher ceilings than Lamar Jackson, and I'll pull him up so I can talk about him. And a lot of leagues, Lamar Jackson, there was premium value spent to get Lamar Jackson. He did 15 points against the Cleveland or the Browns, which is a predictive matchup where it's like that's a really good defense. But if you're spending premium capital on a quarterback or anybody in fantasy, and you're like, well, I shouldn't roll him out this week because it's a bad matchup, they should be downgraded as a player. And he did 11 points against Seattle and then Arizona. But again, 33 points against the Lions. And I bring all this up is because there are other guys from a fantasy perspective, like Josh Dobbs, Sam Howell, Dak, Purdy, and CJ Stroud that were better capital spent than Lamar Jackson. Now, am I saying that you should buy or sell Lamar Jackson? No, I don't know how predictive he's going to be going forward, and that's part of the problem. But that's what happens when you pay for the elite quarterbacks and they aren't matchup proof. And you have to stream around them, then you should have gone a different direction. And I do think from a fantasy perspective with Lamar Jackson, that was absolutely predictive going in the season. I did talk about that earlier on. So going forward, you have this boom best quarterback one that you have to be aware of with all these matchups going forward that you don't know what the outcomes are going to be. I don't know in the fantasy championship and the fantasy semis against Miami and San Francisco what Lamar Jackson is going to do for me. So I don't know who would be buying Lamar Jackson, and I don't know who would be selling Lamar Jackson, but either way, I'm glad I don't have any Lamar Jackson shares. Gus Bus in this game was at 52% snaps, 11 for 24, a touchdown, and another 1 for 4. Justice Hill was at 26% snaps, 2 for 7. Keaton Mitchell was at 24% snaps, 3 for 34. I think he had a negative, one of his carries was negative. And one of those went for a touchdown. I think he had a negative 5-yard rush, a 0-yard rush, and a 39-yard rush, and then a negative 5-yard rush. Anyway, 2 for 1 for 32. And Harbaugh did come out and say that it was a coaching issue. They just forgot to play him more in the game. That will change going forward. That's why in my Chasing the Dragon video, I changed my mind, said that I would not be spending on him last week. I would put in a little bit more on him this week, expecting that the efficiency will lead to more opportunity. But I don't think that he'll win me my league. I think what he'll do is, at best, you're looking at a boom bust RB2. And in a similar role to how Gus Bus has been playing this week or this year. I'm very non-predictive on what Keaton Mitchell's role will be, how much opportunity we'll have, and if he'll actually convert that into touchdowns. Zay Flowers at 87% snaps, 6 for 5 for 73. And again, if it's not predictive, I don't know how much I like it. OBJ at 33% snaps took a 40-yard slant to the house. Again, none of these guys in my mind are really rollable. Rashad Bateman was at 74% snaps, 4 for 2 for 25. Nelson Aguilar was at 43% snaps, 2 targets. And again, good luck predicting the backfield for the Ravens. Good luck predicting the wide receivers for the Ravens, and good luck predicting what Lamar Jackson will do on a week-to-week basis. That's what hurts about fantasy. It's all about being able to predict things. And outside of trying to guess the spike week, like, good luck. Mark Andrews, 72% snaps, 4 for 2 for 44. And again, that's about the only guy I would trust out of all these guys. The defense is a weekly play. They have a bye week, and then week 13, or they have a bye week 13. And then the Rams, Jacksonville, and then I wouldn't be rolling them out probably against San Francisco or Miami. So trying to guess, like, they are a weekly play, but there may be better streaming options out there. Week 11 Bengals at the Chargers. Again, I would be rolling them out against Justin Herbert because of how inconsistent the Chargers have been. But again, there are probably better matchups to be going out there because that could turn into an absolute shootout. All right, Saints. Derek Carr, 49% snaps, 13 for 18, 110, and left with a concussion. They are going to into a bye this week. Famous Jameis was at 49% snaps, 13 for 25, 122, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Other guys have pointed this out. I'm just going to reiterate it. Jameis Winston is a gunslinger. It's probably better for Chris Olave and Raheem Shaheed and even A.T. Perry that we'll talk about that Jameis Winston is the quarterback because he will throw footballs that other quarterbacks in the league will not think about throwing. He'll throw interceptions. But from a fantasy perspective, we don't care because opportunities are opportunities. It's a slight downgrade for Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill if Jameis Winston comes in the game. He's less likely to check down to Alvin Kamara because he will put the ball vertically down the field. And that means that some of the touchdowns that Taysom Hill needs by coming into the red zone and being a vulture will not be there because they will go to Olave and Shaheed and A.T. Perry and other guys in the passing game because he will throw it. And remember, famous Jameis is a turnover machine. It's coming out of the bye. So if Jameis Winston is the quarterback, it would upgrade any potential defense that rolls against the Saints going forward. And I should look that up and be prepared. So coming out of the bye, if it is Jameis Winston, that would upgrade Atlanta going up against him. I don't know how much after 1 week. I don't know how much value Jameis Winston will have going forward. I think they'll eventually go back to Derek Carr. Let's see. Alvin Kamara was at 76% snaps coming off that low. 9 for 42, 7 for 7 for 33 in the passing game. Jamal Williams is at 22%, 4 for 7 for 1 for 3. If that's your cuff, that's your cuff. I just think that there's limited value to cuffing Alvin Kamara. His role will probably be diced up between Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller, and Taysom Hill. Chris Olave, 81% snaps, 9 for 6 for 94 and a tug. Again, I think that Jameis Winston would upgrade Chris Olave. Michael Thomas has a significant knee injury. I don't know if there's any news on this. I didn't even check on this beforehand. Let's see. Yeah, it says out with a significant knee injury. Raheem Shaheed didn't get the jump in usage with Michael Thomas going out. He was only at 69% snaps, 9 for 5 for 24. I think this does, with Michael Thomas going out, he will get a slight upgrade in usage, but I don't know how predictive it will be. It won't put him into a weekly type role. He's still going to be a dart throw. A.T. Perry, the rookie, 84% snaps, 4 for 2 for 38, and 1 touchdown. That would be the guy that I would be going out there and stashing. I don't know if he will ever move beyond maybe that wide receiver 3 type range. Again, the wide receiver 1 for this offense is going to be Olave. Then they have Kamara and Taysom Hill will be the gadget guy. So the amount of opportunities that A.T. Perry has going forward, he has more value in much deeper leagues and dynasty for A.T. Perry than anything else. Raheem Shaheed, I think, still will remain in that dart throw type of like boom bust wide receiver 3 range. And then Taysom Hill had the lowest usage since week 3. He only was 4 for 2 for 17 in the passing game, and then 1 for 6 in the receiving game. And it kind of shows from a fantasy perspective the uses of Taysom Hill. Like he has to get into the red zone and then he has to score touchdowns. Otherwise, he's this. If we're using an apples to apples comparison, he would be like a running back that isn't getting the correct usage. So he doesn't have enough gravy left over if he's not getting if he's not turning in the red zone opportunities either on the ground, through the air, or throwing them. And then the weekend, their defense has a bye and then goes up against Atlanta coming out of the bye. All right, Geno Smith for the Seahawks, predictive, and we like things that are predictive in fantasy. I have predictive written down like 3 times here. Going up against the Redskins that had a bad pass rush and a bad secondary, Geno Smith gets home 31, 47, 369, 2 tugs, another 1 for 13 on the ground. So being able to take a guy like Geno Smith, roll him out, and getting a better week against a predictive matchup than trying to roll a Lamar Jackson out there with that potential ceiling. Sometimes from a fantasy perspective, it's just better to take the path of least resistance and take the smart matchup than trying to chase the theoretical upside of a guy that's non-predictive. So Kenneth Walker was at 48% snaps. This is kind of the trend that's been going on, but he still takes the large volume of the work, 19 for 63, and then another 2 for 1 and a 64-yard touchdown. He did have 4 red zone carries. So they are giving the better usage to Kenneth Walker, and then Charbonnet is just coming in and getting the dirty work, similar to how we see Derrick Henry and Tajay Spears going forward. So Charbonnet is a priority pickup, if for no other reason than to cuff Kenneth Walker. He's at 52% snaps, 6 for 44, another 5 for 4 for 18. Now, would I be selling Kenneth Walker? I don't know what I would get in return for him because there's so few running backs that would have value. There is probably going to be a Zach Charbonnet week somewhere down the line that's going to be non-predictive, where he gets a larger majority of the snaps and the receiving work, and then he falls in the end zone. And Kenneth Walker gives you a sub 40-degree day, and Zach Charbonnet is a top 5 running back. I would probably guess that. So you plan accordingly when it comes to these guys. But again, there's so few running backs that have been able to get home this year that I just don't know what I would get in return for Kenneth Walker. And if I was trying to buy him, the guy's going to ransom Kenneth Walker like he's an RB1 when he's not. DK Metcalf, 89% snaps, 12 for 7 for 98. Tyler Lockett, 70% snaps, 10 for 8 for 92 and a touchdown. JSN, 62% snaps, 5 for 4 for 53. Again, wide receiver 3s grow on trees. I think we have a better idea how this offense shakes out. DK and Lockett are probably in that wide receiver 2 land, and they're going to be non-predictive. JSN may have his weeks, but again, trying to guess the week that he scores touchdown is probably going to be futile. Jake Bogo, 27% snaps, 2 for 13. And again, probably outside of a stash in Dynasty. I don't know how much. He's not relevant in redraft. The defense does have some appeal this week at the Rams. I want to verify that I'm not wrong about who they play. Yeah, at the Rams. And then I wouldn't roll them out again until week 16 and week 17 at the Titans and home against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, so moving on to the Steelers, speaking of, Kenny Pickett was at 14 for 23, 126, 4 for 16. Najee, 51% of snaps, same as Jaylen Warren, 16 for 82, a touchdown, and then 4 for 3 for 14. And then Jaylen Warren was at 15 carries, 101 yards, a touchdown, 4 for 2 for 9. If this is going to be the Steelers' offense going forward, it makes Najee and Jaylen Warren RB2s and their weekly starts. They are going to have a little bit of touchdown dependence to them, but if they can get in that 4 to 5 targets a game range, yeah, they're going to have the receiving floor on a week-to-week basis to be rolled out there, even when they don't have the higher efficiency in the rushing game, the gravy that needs to get you there. But again, I just don't know how predictive this offense is going to be. But if the offense is going to lean heavily on Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris, in my mind, they would both be buys if you're really running back needy. Because I don't know if the owner would treat them as RB2s going forward. because that's what they haven't been going. We have to make a prediction at the trade deadline. The trade deadline says buy right now, and I will probably be making a move on Najee this week in one of my leagues as my RB3. So anyway, this would lower the value of Deontay Johnson and George Pickens because they're just going to try and grind everybody into the ground. Pickens was at 95% snaps, 4 for 3 for 45. He's going to move into that boom bust RB3 range. And Deontay Johnson was at 82% snaps, 4 for 1 for 17. And if I want either of these two guys, if this is how the offense is going to run, it would probably be Pickens because of that upside. I just don't see Deontay Johnson getting the volume again moving forward. Muth could come off the IR as early as this week. Again, tight ends can't lose me my week, so I would have a little bit of interest in Muth, but there just aren't a lot of targets to go around, and he's going to end up being heavily touchdown dependent. I would probably go other places, again, like a Michael Mayer. The defense, I wouldn't be rolling out until week 14. They have the Pats, and then they have the Colts after that, so plan accordingly if you want to try and catch those matchups. All right, the Texans, 3 teams left. CJ Stroud, 23 of 39, 356, a tug, and a pick. Another 2 for 8 with a touchdown on the ground and 2 more fumbles lost. Not as concerned with the turnovers from a fantasy perspective. Really good. Allows me to have spent my capital other places with a CJ Stroud. I don't know who I would be if I would be selling him if I have him, because I don't know who else I would have on my roster outside of him. No news on Dameon Pierce. So this would be one of the things I would talk about with Devin Singletary if he's available on waivers. He was at 81% snaps, 30 for 150, 2 touchdowns, 2 for 1 for 11. And I will bring him up so I can talk about him as I hopefully don't spill my green tea. So overall, the Texans have not been efficient on the ground all year. So even when we saw the flop in usage week 6 against the Saints, and we actually saw some efficiency on the ground from Devin Singletary, they weren't very efficient in week 8, where we expected to see that flop continue. And then week 9, they weren't efficient. That's what led to him being dropped or not rolled this week, where he did this massive spike week. So the 2 things I would say about Devin Singletary going forward is, even if Dameon Pierce is out, there's no guarantee that the efficiency is going to remain. He still wasn't involved in the passing game. That's what they have Mike Boone for. Mike Boone was at 19% snaps, 3 for 2 for 6. So that's more of the receiving down back going forward. So he's not going to have this receiving floor or any receiving at all to look at. And then we also have to worry that Dameon Pierce is going to come back and eat into this 81% usage. So without being able to predict what Dameon Pierce is going to be from an injury standpoint, the amount of money that I would spend on Devin Singletary going into next week would more be predicated on denying my opponent the ability to roll him against me than it would for me to actually want to spend on him going forward. Now, I have a big asterisk next to that. When I talked about earlier of how much fab that you have left, like what would I be putting on these guys, like from a bidding standpoint, from a strategy standpoint. I can't go into the offseason with my fab, and between him and Ty Chandler and Rico Dowdle, like I would be putting a significant amount of the fab that I have left. There's no point on holding it anymore. I don't know how many guys left are going to have the significant enough upside on a week-to-week basis. It's something to factor into what I would be putting out there. But yeah, I definitely like Ty Chandler, because I think that with I'll talk about Ty Chandler here in a second. But I'm less interested in Devin Singletary, not knowing what Dameon Pierce's status is going to be, and the overall lack of efficiency from the Texans running game. So moving forward, Nico was out this week. I don't have any news on him. Tank Dell was at 96% snaps, 14 targets, 6 receptions, 56 yards, and a touchdown. So with Nico being out, Tank Dell is the number one. Noah Brown was at 75% snaps, 8 for 7 for 172 in that Nico role. Again, the power X. That's what Nico plays. That's what Noah Brown plays. Robert Woods was at 60% snaps, 3 for 1 for 15. Dalton Schultz was at 88% snaps, 6 for 4 for 71. So with Nico being out, Noah Brown slotting in, I don't see Noah Brown going away. But again, apples to apples, Noah Brown and Brandon Ayuk, to go all the way back to the beginning, he has to be heavily efficient, even in his role in this offense, for him to get home. So you're playing with the fire that he's going to do, 8 for 3 for 30 yards in this offense with Nico out, let alone when Nico comes back in, that he's not going to continue to do 75% routes or snaps and then get 8 targets. He may have those weeks going forward, but if I'm going to be spending on Noah Brown outside of desperation wide receiver 2 this week, hoping that Nico Collins remains out, that like down the line, I imagine that Noah Brown will be at best more of a boom bust wide receiver 3 in this offense, hoping. And then I do have written down the schedule for the Texans is favorable at certain points, but it has changed because of overall changes in the offense that they're play. So right now, week 11, Arizona, I would not be rolling them against Kyler Murray. I would be rolling them against Jacksonville and Trevor Lawrence. The Broncos are a play. At the Jets are a play. At the Titans are a play. Even against the Browns and Deshaun Watson are a play, and then Tennessee. So again, they have a good stretch going forward. So even if as a defense, they haven't necessarily been living up to expectations, coming up 9 points against Cincinnati and some of these other games, like I do think that they have the ability to be rolled out as a week-to-week basis going forward, picking them up. I've talked about them all year. So the Titans, Will Levis was 19 of 39, 199 and a pick. I do think he's going to be a weekly, or depending on the matchup, on a week-to-week basis, more so than a weekly start. Derrick Henry's down to 43% snaps, 11 for 24, 1 for 1 for -4. I don't think that he's a sell because I don't know what you're going to replace him with at this point. I would be picking up Tajay Spears if he's still available, 60% of snaps, 5 for 18, another 5 for 4 for 42. I can imagine that he's going to continue to be integrated into the offense regardless of the game script. So I think he has a low enough receiving core floor. Think Antonio Gibson going forward. DeAndre Hopkins was at 79% snaps, 8 for 3 for 27. Those 8 targets attached to Will Levis is going to keep him in that like boom bust wide receiver 2 range. Kyle Phillips was at 35% snaps, 5 for 3 for 61. I'm not chasing the productivity in this offense attached to Will Levis, lower volume passing offense. They're going to be heavily based with Derrick Henry, and Kyle Phillips just isn't getting the snap share. I have no idea on Treylon Burks. The schedule, I do have written down to check out the schedule for the Titans. Jacksonville is going to be a good role on defense. Carolina, the Colts, no to Miami, no to Houston, no to Seattle, no to Houston. So Jacksonville, Carolina, the Colts are a good three-game stretch for the Titans defense to be rolled out there. And finally, last but not least, we have the Vikings, Josh Dobbs, 23 for 34, 268, a touchdown, 4 for 44, and a touchdown on the ground. I think that, I guess I brought this up in the Chasing the Dragon video. He is going to be a top 10, top 5 overall guy. There are probably going to be some weeks that are going to kill you. And if those happen in the fantasy playoffs, that's going to, just end your season. He's also going to have the ability to be on a weekly basis an elite guy. So, pick your poison on that one. If you can get around that. Like I said, I'm trying to sell him, but I have Hurts in that league. And in my other league that I own him, I have Kyler and CJ Stroud. So I can afford to sell Josh Dobbs. In certain other leagues, you can build around a guy like him to give you the upside and realize that he can kill you on other weeks. So hopefully you have spent the capital other places that you can re-rolling Josh Dobbs out there. Alexander Madison was 45% snaps, left with a concussion. 8 for 27, still inefficient. 2 for 1 for 6. Ty Chandler, again, this would be a guy that if you've been holding on to that fab, I would be spending on. May have a pathway to be an RB2 rest of the season. He was at 44% snaps, 15 for 45, and a touchdown. I would be interested more so. I think that he could be used more in the passing game. I think that if Madison comes back, Madison will be the de facto goal line back, but they throw at a very high level in the red zone for the Vikings, that Josh Dobbs or TJ Hawkinson would probably be the guy that would get a majority of the work. I don't think it cuts into overall or Madison being the red zone back would cut into Ty Chandler because I would already realize that he wouldn't be the red zone guy anyway. No news on Justin Jefferson yet. Jordan Addison, 97% snap, 7 for 4 for 69. I think this downgrades Jordan Addison going forward just because Justin Jefferson is going to go back. TJ Hawkinson is going to be the 2. This is going to move Jordan Addison into that wide receiver 3 range rest of the season. So be aware of that when it's going forward in the trade deadline if someone's willing to buy. No news on KJ Osborne, the concussion. If Justin Jefferson doesn't come back and KJ Osborne continues to be out, Jalen Naylor, I think he's the second-year wide receiver out of Michigan State. This would be the guy that if you're in deeper leagues, and I should take these off so I can explain this. Jalen Naylor, the second-year wide receiver from Michigan State, 92% snaps, 1 for 1 for 16. If KJ Osborne continues to be out and you're very wide receiver needy, just the fact that he's getting the opportunity by being on the field this much would put him in the range of outcomes to finish as a top 30 wide receiver this week in this passing offense. So be advised of all that. And their defense is a role this week at Denver. The way that the Vikings are designed, they will take away the running game and then they will blitz, which will potentially lead to good fantasy outcomes. Let's see. And I don't have anything else to talk about. From a recap standpoint, I would be standing on Ty Chandler and Rico Dowdle. And I think Devin Singletary and Noah Brown have some appeal. If guys like Trey McBride and Josh Dobbs fell through your leagues, I would be picking them up. And there are some sneaky guys to be stashing that I talked about everywhere. But otherwise, I would be focusing on making sure I have my defenses set to go into the playoffs. So anyway, that's about all I got. And maybe I'll come back later this week and do something else.